Hi, I have one more story from Bedtime Adventures for you. This is the story of 12 Blocks from Home, and it's in Bedtime Adventures, Fluffy and His Friends. Well, one time, the dog family was out with their master, and they were taking a car ride. And they came to a stop and it was a hot day, and all the windows were down, and the dog family was together, and it was Papa Dog and Mama Dog and Hannah Dog and Alice Dog and George Dog and Janie Dog, and they were all together in the car, and they came to a stop, and the master had to look over to that side of the street to see something that was going on there. And all of a sudden, George Dog looked out the window, and there was a toy store. And you know what he saw in the toy store? He saw Lego castles that he had never chewed on before. He was so excited. And you know what he did? He just went bloop and jumped out the door. Well, Janie Dog, when she saw that, she jumped out the door because she did everything George Dog did. And then, of course, Alice and Hannah Dog, they jumped out the window too, because they wanted to go after them, make sure they were okay. And of course, the Mama and Papa Dog jumped out the window too. And it happened so quickly. It was just like bloop, 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 bloop. And the master never saw it, and the light turned green, and the car just drove away. Well, there they all were on the corner, and the car was gone. And Hannah Dog and Alice Dog just glared at George Dog because he had done something so silly by jumping out the window like that. But Papa Dog said, "Hey, everybody, okay, we are far away from home right now. We're about 12 blocks from home, and we need to get home." And they looked up at the sky, and they could tell it was getting kind of late, and so they really had to start going. So they had 12 blocks to go. So they started walking down that 12th block, and it was an exciting block to walk down. You know why? Because there were all sorts of stores there, and there was the toy store, and they went in the toy store for a little bit, and they kept looking by through all the windows. They went really slowly, and they thought, "Oh, look at all the pretty things in there." And Papa Dog kept saying, "How in the world how can people get the money to buy all this stuff?" And Mama Dog saw a store where there was material, because she used to like to make dresses for the girl dogs and everything like that. Oh, and it was just such a neat block. And then they came to the end of it, and they crossed the street over to the 11th block, and they stopped there and they looked. There were even more stores. There were more exciting stores. In fact, there were people out on the sidewalk giving out free things if you would only go into their store. And the Mama and Papa Dog stopped, and they said, "Oh no, this isn't good. If we take as long on this block as we did on the last one, we'll never get home on time. We have to remember what we're doing here." And the Papa Dog said, "Okay, everybody has to remember. Everybody take hands. And now we have to walk together." And there was somebody who said, "Well, can we just go in one store?" But they had already been in several stores, and they just said, "No, we have to we can go slowly, but we need to just keep on walking." It was a really, really hard block to walk because there were so many good things, and there was music, and there were lights, and it was so exciting and everything. And Greg Dog started to growl a little bit because he wanted to go in some of the stores. And Janae Dog, she was crying a little bit, but they made it. They made it to the end of that 11th block, and then it happened. They stopped holding hands, and they started going across the street, and Alice Dog started running across the street, and she didn't see the dump truck, and they yelled at her, and they said, "Alice, watch out." And if Alice would have just kept going, it would have been okay, and she would have just jumped on the sidewalk. But when she heard their voices, she got scared, and she tried to run back, and the dump truck driver, he slammed on his brakes, and the back of the truck went boom, 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 and it came to a stop, and it didn't hit her. And they all got onto the 10th block, and they were so happy, and they were just happy that the Lord had saved her and that there hadn't been an accident. And then the Papa Dog said, "Okay, from now on, everybody hold hands and nobody let go." And they walked that block, and that block was also full of stores. and things that were distracting, but they were all really happy. And somehow, because of what happened, almost happened to Alice Dog, they really thought, we need to concentrate on getting home. So that block wasn't that much of a problem. And then they came to the ninth block. And on the ninth block, there were just houses and things like that. And it seemed like, oh, this is going to be an easy block to get by. So they started at the bottom of the ninth block. They walked up almost to the top. They were almost at the eighth block. And then Papa Dog said, okay, everybody, just look forward. There's a dog up there. He looks like he could be a mean dog. Don't look at him in the eyes, okay? You just do what Mama Dog and I tell you to do. And so Mama Dog kind of put her arms around the other dogs, and they walked up there. And just like he thought, and they were almost at the eighth block, just like he thought, the mean dog came out, and he said, why are you here? He was just a dark, dark, spirited dog. And the Papa Dog said, well, all we want to do is we just want to get by. We're on our way home. And the mean dog growled at them. And you could tell that he wanted to bite them, but he couldn't because there were other people walking in the block, and that kind of made him not want to bite them. He said, but I'm not going to let you by here. Well, the dog family backed up for a little bit, and they thought, and all the children wanted to say something to him, but the Mama Dog said, no, we can't say anything to him. And the Papa Dog said, let's just turn around and go back. Oh, well, they didn't like that idea. Why should that dog be able to stand in front of them and tell them not to go any further? But the Papa Dog just said, go back with your mommy. And so they turned around and they started walking back down that ninth block to the 10th block. And oh, that just seemed wrong and unfair and bad and everything. And the Papa Dog walked too, but he kept looking back at that mean dog because he didn't want him to do anything. So they got down to the corner, and then the Papa Dog said, let's just go in one whole block, and then we'll go up on the other side of the block, and then that way we can get up to the 8th block. And they started walking, and of course everybody was a little grumpy now, and just when something's unfair like that, it just makes you feel not awful. And they came in the middle of the block. There was an alley, and Hannah Dog said, let's go up the alley, this will be a lot quicker. Oh, and the Mama and Papa Dog said, no, what if the mean dog came out and he did something? We wouldn't be able to do anything, and there wouldn't be anybody there to keep him from biting us or anything. Oh, and so they went way over to another block, and then they went up, and then they crossed the street, and they came over, and they were just about at the corner that they were almost at on the 8th block. And Papa Dog said, don't look back. Coming out of the alley was the mean dog. If they would have gone down the alley, he would have found them for sure. And now they were on the 8th block. Well, the 8th block, they were all tired, but the 8th block was pretty. It had nice, pretty houses, and the houses were all made up nice with nice bushes and flowers in front, and they all had nice green lawns in front of them and trees. The trees were like elm trees, and they went up and they made almost like a cathedral. They kind of met at the top, and it was like walking down a green tunnel. It was very, very pretty. But the dog family was so tired, and all of the children were tired and thirsty and hungry, and they were on the 8th block, and it just seemed like such a long way. And as they were walking, the Papa looked over and he saw a nice lady out on her front lawn, and she was trimming roses and everything. And he went up and he said, would it be okay if we could just sit on your lawn for a little while? And the lady looked over and she said, oh, you poor dears. She said, yes, you can sit on my lawn. So they went and they sat down on the lawn, and it was under the shade, and it was nice and soft, and it felt kind of cool. And then, a big surprise, she came out, and she had a tray full of sandwiches and lemonade, and she let them have them. And oh, it was just such a nice time. She was such a kind lady, and her house was so pretty, and the lawn was so nice, and they had such a nice talk, and they remembered that nice lady for a long time, because right at the time when they needed somebody to be kind to them, there she was. And so they got up and they thanked her and they said goodbye, and they kept walking up the 8th block, and then they got onto the 7th block, and the 7th block was just like the 8th block. Very, very, very pretty houses. And the trees were so nice, it just made them feel good about where they were going. But they still had some blocks to go. So they crossed the 7th block to the 6th block. And it was like, what happened here? This was so different than the other blocks. On the 6th block, in the 5th block, the houses, they were all not painted, and they were made out of wood, and the wood wasn't cared for, and some of the windows were broken out, and they didn't have like real yards in front of them. There was just like they were set up on a little kind of a little hill, but the hill was all dirt and everything, and there were holes in it some places. And then on the curb where there had been trees, people had come along and they had broken up all those trees, and besides there was no grass there anyway. It was just like dirt and everything. And you could, as they walked the 6th block, they could hear mommies and daddies yelling at each other, and they could hear children laughing and fighting and all sorts of stuff. Boy, were they happy to get off of that block. And then they went on to the 5th block, and it was just the same. Dirty and dry, and it just made you feel bad. And then a dog came out on the front lawn, a little boy dog, and he was yelling at them, and he was saying naughty things that nobody, even a dog, should say. And then the papa dog said, "Don't look at him. Let's just keep walking." And he threw a stone, and he hit George Dog on the head. That mean little dog. And Hannah and Alice, they wanted to run after him because, again, that was just so unfair. But Mama said, "Nope, we have to keep on going. We have to remember where we are, and we have to keep on going toward home." And she had a Band-Aid in her purse, so she took out the Band-Aid, and she put it on the cut on George Dog's head, and they kept going. And then they went on to the 4th block. Now, the 4th and the 3rd blocks, there were some nice houses, and then there were houses that weren't kept up. And you could always tell the houses that weren't kept up because the grass was real high, and it was growing over the sidewalk, and sometimes they would get scratched because and the bushes were growing right up over the sidewalk and everything, and the bushes weren't being kept up. And then there would be a nice house or two, and then there would be kind of a middle house. It was just sort of like an ordinary place. And you know what? When you go through places like that sometimes, it just makes you grumpy. And the children were definitely getting grumpy. That 4th and that 3rd block were just like, nah, nothing special, and it just didn't look nice and everything. And but Papa Dog kept saying, "We're almost there. We're almost on the 2nd and 1st block, and then we'll be home." Well, they crossed from the 3rd block over to the 2nd block, and I have to tell you, it was uphill. That 2nd block was all uphill. It was so much uphill, they didn't even think about if there were houses there, if there were fields there. All they could think about is the sun was hot, and they were going uphill, and they were holding each other's hands, and each other's hands were getting sweaty, and they kept going up that hill, and they kept going up and up and up, and they did the 2nd block, and then they went across the street to the 1st block, and there were some mosquitoes too, and they kept going up the 1st block, and it was uphill, but they could almost see their house from there. And just before they got to the corner of that 1st block to cross the street to the house, the Papa Dog said, "Hey, everybody, look back." And you know what? Because they had been going uphill, they didn't realize that when they looked back, they could see everything of where they came from. They could see way, way out in the distance. They could see all the bright lights of those stores. They could almost see the corner where they had gotten out of the car. Wow. And then they saw they saw the street there where Alice Dog almost got hurt. And then just for a second, it made them feel that warm feeling inside about how God had really taken care of them and made sure that Alice Dog didn't get hurt. And then they saw the other block. And you know what happened on that other block? George Dog looked out there, and he thought he could see that mean dog out on the street just barking at people and growling at people. And then they couldn't see any of the pretty houses. You know what? Because there were so many trees, but they knew exactly where they were. And they imagined in their mind what that memory was like, and that really nice lady who had given them the sandwiches and lemonade and everything, and how nice she'd been. And then they saw those really dry, dusty blocks, the place where George got hit in the head. And they saw the places that were so hard for them to get through because they were so ordinary, and there was nothing special. But now they were standing up at the top of that first block and almost home. And it made them feel really good about how God had taken care of them and walked them all that way, even through the things that weren't exciting and even through the things that were really dangerous. And there were some pretty places along the way, and there were some places where they really had to concentrate to get through and everything. They just felt that God had really, really taken care of them. And so they crossed over to their block, and right on the corner was their house, and they went around to the doggy door, and they all came in the doggy door, and there was the master in the kitchen cooking, and he said, "Oh, you're back. Very good. And you know what? It's time for supper." And they all sat down and had a wonderful meal, and they all felt grateful about going those 12 blocks so they could get home.